It's because of New York's resilient entrepreneurs that New York is, in fact, New York, and has produced more innovation than maybe anywhere else in modern times, from culture to finance, from technology to couture, from product fabrication to cosmetics. And it's the conviction and determination of New York's hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs that have kept this city's head above the Great Recession. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel, moderated by one of my oldest and dearest friends, and one of my most favorite entrepreneurs in the world, and she knows it, Sunny Bates, author and founder of Sunny Bates Associates, entrepreneur Phil Cooley, author and entrepreneur Lisa Gansky, Sandy Ikeda, associate professor of economics at the State University of New York, and Stephanie Pereira. How'd I do?
You did great.
I should do that well. Art program director at Kickstarter. Thank you. Thank you, panel.
All right.
Sunny.
All right, Lisa. Let's see. Are we on the... There we go. Can you go back? Okay. So last century was about acquisition. We were busy getting stuff from what I refer to as the century of the generals. General Motors, General Electric, General Dynamics, General Mills. It was a lot of buying things and building infrastructure. This is a different moment in time. We're moving to the world of sharing. This is about the mesh, which is otherwise known as the sharing economy. We're moving to a world in which access to goods, services, and talent will triumph over the ownership of them. We might ask, or you might be asking, why is this happening now? Well, I think there's a few reasons. One is that in 1900, 10% of the world's population lived in places like this, cities, and they accommodated that number of people, and we've been basically still playing with that playbook. We're rapidly moving to a different reality, 9.3 billion people on the planet, and recent studies in the last 2 years have suggested that 75 to 80% of the world's population will be moving into urban environments. We're going to need different tools, different strategies, different ways of thinking about things. The second thing is the recession, economic downturn, the restart, reshift, whatever you want to call it. The economic situation has caused many of us, from a business perspective or a personal perspective, to rethink the relationship between cost and value, to really realign the relationship between the true cost of things and the true value. Thirdly, big corporations or big brands that we've trusted for decades have betrayed us. And so as an entrepreneur, I would say this is a great moment because people are far more open in any demographic all around the world. Many people are far more open to trying new products, services, ideas, and experiencing new brands. And lastly, historically, we're more connected to more people on the planet than ever before, unless you're sitting next to them. The cocktail for meshiness, or how this comes together, I think social networks are allowing us to find each other more easily. Physical things are more located. My friend Clay Shirky, another author, talks about the world being legible, that we're able to see buildings, but also what's inside of buildings, restaurants, pop-ups, all sorts of things. And we can track packages, and there's a whole alphabet soup of technology, but basically we can find things very easily. And third, many of us are carrying these increasingly small in price and size, very clever mobile devices that are GPS and web enabled, that really kind of act as a remote control in our life. So we are getting off a plane in Mumbai or in Sao Paulo or New York and immediately can locate ourselves, find a table at a restaurant or a co-working space. It's pretty incredible. And these three things coming together are taking the friction out of sharing. We're at an inflection point where sharing is more convenient and less costly than ownership. So when you think about population density, really we're going to have many more people in the same physical space, I think that we're trading really rich experiences for stuff. So if we look at a couple of different categories, and to put some meat on the bones, sorry, you vegetarians, but the example that I'll use is in the travel industry. The fastest growing segment in the travel industry won't surprise many of you that it's lodging, but it's not hotels. It's private homes. So private homes, yours and mine, vacation homes or our primary house, is being rented out in full or rooms or part studios for people who are traveling or people who are periodically staying in a city that they otherwise maybe are renting their house. And so these homes are showing up through networks like this. This one is called Airbnb, but there are many of them, Roomarama, Crashpadder, One Fine Stay, it goes on and on. These are actually allowing us individually to put our homes up and receive money for them. Airbnb currently has been given a $2 billion market cap. It's a privately held company. And in a few years, there's 200,000 listings in 30,000 cities around the world. The average person around the world who casually rents out some part of their house is making about $7,000 a year. The top number is in the hundreds of thousands. The New York average is about $25,000 a year. The core principle of the mesh is this: value unused is waste. So if you're a business or a city, all the things on the asset side of the balance sheet, factories, buildings, all sorts of infrastructure, certainly talent, intellectual property, all of those assets, when they're not used, they're wasted. Cities are an amazing opportunity to start to look at how we can convert waste in that way to real value. And we heard about some of that in the POP discussion this morning, for example. So there's another platform, my colleague here, Stephanie, you'll hear from shortly. But there's ways to begin to reach out to the public. This is a play on Kickstarter, but we can imagine that in neighborhoods and in various parts of cities around the world, you can actually kind of create the funding for and the support from your community, from the public, for a variety of initiatives, projects, community culinary kitchens, to an actual production you want to put on in your community, all sorts of things. And so you'll be hearing from the Kickstarter person in a few minutes, but I think we can also apply this to civic challenges, get support and gain funding using the tools that we have and that we're applying in other ways. Another example of how cities are playing with platforms, and in fact our platforms, is this one called Neighborland, which was originally launched in New Orleans, asking people from the ground up, looking at urban planning from the neighborhood and from the community directly, saying, what do you want to see here? And so this is just a really simple platform that emerges with people saying, this is what I want. I think we need this kind of community space, or we need a coffee shop. I can't believe it, but we don't have one in my neighborhood. And so these projects and these platforms are launching nationally and internationally as we speak. From my perspective, data, which is often in cities been held by various organizations in the city itself, is now coming alive by being liberated and making itself available to designers, architects, and also application developers or platform developers. And from that, we're seeing a number of things. The CTO for the US, the CTO for the White House, Todd Park, talks a lot about liberating data and how that will really open up so many interesting solutions and applications. We're seeing it in London with the London Data Store, where they're making their data available for free for anyone. We're seeing for-profit companies emerge like SeeClickFix, which is based here in New York, but allows any of us with a camera or mobile camera to take a picture of a pothole or a car that's idling or a light that's not functioning properly and put it into the system so that the city can respond more rapidly. It actually takes a whole piece of the otherwise managing the infrastructure issue out of the equation. And it's now being applied to more than just infrastructure. So this is an international platform, but based here in New York. In the UK, they have this notion, the way they talk about it is meanwhile spaces or meanwhile cities. So meanwhile, while you're not using it, somebody else can do such and such a thing. I really like the idea, so I thought I would float it by you. But meanwhile cities, another thing that's based in New York that's gaining a lot of traction is this called loose cubes. And the idea is that many of us work in offices where there's cubes. When they're loose, when they're not being used, they can get put on the network. Loose Cubes is operating in just under 500 cities around the world. And they basically, if I have 6 cubes in my office that are available, I can put them up on the network and allow other people to gain access. This isn't a game that only entrepreneurs in small companies or startups can play. GE has launched GE Garages, which is bringing the community into factories and implementing interesting projects, supporting with talent and IP. So really the currency and where we're going is about better things, easily shared. Shared things will have more value. So begin to experiment. We're really early. I encourage you to maybe even blow a few things up, but get in and start to play. And the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Thank you.
Phil, go for it.
Go for it? All right.
You bet. Absolutely. Phil Cooley.
I don't know if my slide's going to pop up or not, but it's not as important anyway, so I'm going to get started. So basically, I'm really lucky because I went to Columbia. And that's not Columbia University, it's Columbia College. It's an enrollment that if you pay, you can continue to go there. So I'm usually the dumbest guy in the room, which is a really wonderful place to be in my opinion, because it encourages me to collaborate. And I think when we talk about creativity and we talk about innovation, in my opinion, this comes from desperation and this comes from collaboration. And so when I moved to Detroit, I moved there because I heard like the sounds of Derek May, of Eminem, of the White Stripes. I heard all these incredible things coming from the city that everyone was judging. I saw the works of Tyree Guyton that was changing how artists interacted with their communities. So what I wanted to do was go to this place that would allow me, a democratic city that would allow me to participate. And so I ended up in Detroit working, started a barbecue restaurant, and it was oddly successful. Again, not because of me, because I had awesome partners that made it work. If it would have been my food, you would have been ill. If it would have been my service, you wouldn't have enjoyed yourself. But literally, incredible chef that I met, a guy who helped me learn how to build things and how to design things. He came in, became a partner, and we built it together. So this is, again, about the power of the masses and all of us working together, I think is going to move us, create small little businesses like Slow's Barbecue, but also more importantly, tackle much larger issues. So we've talked a little bit about this economic gap that we have. And in my opinion, looking at it, this is our levee, right? That is going to break. We don't know when, but this deferred cost continues to get greater and greater. And in my opinion, I don't think it's that difficult. The things that we're doing at Pony Ride, which let me go to, sorry, the slide is gone, but let me go to the next slide really quick. That's the building there. This is a 30,000 square foot building that we bought for $100,000. Pretty much fully functional. A lot of the tenants themselves came in, helped us build out the space. We've had about $250,000 worth of volunteer labor to build it. And we're able to subsidize because of the low price and because of the, we're able to bring folks in at a very inexpensive rate, 10 to 20 cents a square foot. And so these people, we didn't say, hey, you should do a hip hop dance studio. They're actually coming in and doing it on their own. They're self-selecting in, and the things that they're creating, the jeans that I'm wearing were made there. These coats that this woman was formerly homeless. She never knew anything about sewing. She's creating these coats for the homeless that are becoming sleeping bags. Incredible stories. Just let people do what they do.
Great. Thank you. Stephanie.
All right.
Like Pechacucha.
Yeah, really. You're fast.
Really fast.
I'm
Yeah.
doing the click. Oh, there. All right. Freeze. All right, so I have one slide for you guys. I'm just going to talk over it. These are our stats. These are our most current stats at Kickstarter, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about who we are and what we do and how it relates to today's conversation. So we're a platform for funding creative projects. A Kickstarter project has to fit into one of our 13 creative categories. So that's art, that's film, that's food, that's design, that's games, that's fashion, stuff like that. It also has to be specific. When we say project, we're really serious about that. Something that you can say, ta-da, it's done, I did it. It's not about launching businesses, it is about making projects. Finally, a Kickstarter project has to offer rewards. And this is really important. The reward you offer in a Kickstarter project benefits both you, the project creator, as well as your backer. Most typically, it's a copy of the thing. So if you're trying to write a book, you're offering someone a copy of the book. The cool thing is that you can also offer creative experiences. And through these experiences, you can invite people into the making of your project as participants, just people who follow along. And of course, you can meet new people along the way. So to the stats, we've been around since April 2009, and since then, over 2.5 million people have pledged over $380 million to nearly 75,000 creative projects on the site. Of those 75,000 projects, over 30,000 of them have been successfully funded on Kickstarter. So what that means is that there are over 30,000 films, CDs, art editions, exhibitions, festivals, performances, games, design objects, you name it, that have been funded on Kickstarter. These are things that are in the process of being made, they're still happening, or they have been made. You can find them in your local bookstore, you can find them in your local museum. You can find them in performance venues like this one, and you can even find them in your Apple store. This week, in fact tomorrow, a Kickstarter-funded documentary called Brooklyn Castle. Some of you may be familiar with it. If you're not, check it out. It's opening on over 100 screens nationwide. So you can see sort of the scope and impact of this thing. In terms of today's discussion, Kickstarter is a space that is absent of the gatekeepers. It is a place where community can mobilize around ideas and where anyone with an idea can connect directly with the people who have the most to gain from those ideas. So it is a musician connecting with her fans, an author connecting with her readers, or a community organizer connecting with their community. In the coming months, we will be launching a new category on the site. The new category is called Civic. And this category has emerged from us recognizing that over the past few years, there have been civic projects. They've fit into the food category as community gardens, or they've popped up in the design category as giant floating pools, or underground parks, or open-air reading libraries, parklets, even some fun interventions. So we're giving these projects their own space to breathe and be celebrated, and also their own space for local communities to discover them and to share them and to support them. Thank you.
Excellent. You're up, Sandy.
Thanks very much. My name is Sandy Ikeda. I'm an economist, and I'm tremendously inspired by the work of Jane Jacobs, who, in fact, considered herself an economist, and some of her greatest contributions were to economic theory, and wedded in the cities or based in the cities. Well, what I'm hearing here from the other participants is really an amazing illustration of the kinds of things that Jacobs talked about and that I'm interested in, namely, how are cities the incubators of ideas? How does entrepreneurship, if we define entrepreneurship as the discovery and creation of value, how does that work? Well, Jacobs talked about diversity of the use of spaces, the diversity of tastes and knowledge, all those things coming together where there are a lot of people, like a lot of population density. But what you need to have that happen, to take advantage of all that diversity, is the ability to form contacts and to form social networks, sort of like what you're all doing today, right? Getting to know people, getting to exposed to different ideas, but on a personal face-to-face level. That's what cities do. Now, one of the things, let's see if I can. There we go. This is an example, kind of a clunky example of forget the numbers for a moment, right? This is taken from a paper I wrote recently. But you may have connections to these people. Like if you're the ego here, if you're the person in question, yeah, right, you may have a connection to John, Juan, and Jamal. And as you go out farther from your own little world, the people that you have contact with come from different backgrounds and different cultures, and importantly, different sources of ideas, novelty, okay? And then you have two people here, John and Mary, that are contacts. But what happens in cities is you can not only make new connections, but break them. And this is what happens here. The ego person here, in order to make a contact with Frank and all of the kinds of information and novelty and diversity that Frank can bring, has to break a tie with John. Maybe somebody leaves their small town. Maybe you leave a job. Maybe you start up something on your own. All this breaking and making of context requires flexibility. You have to be able to use social spaces and public spaces in ways that may be innovative, in much the way that the other panelists here are talking about. Dividing up spaces, co-working shared spaces that, for example, the co-working spaces in Dumbo, and where you have a large area and you have different cubicles and people from different industries, different sectors of the economy working together in the same space, but having some spillover. That kind of face-to-face contact, that kind of connection that you can make with diverse knowledge is extremely important. Cities have always done it. The new economy is not really all that new. Economies have always generated entrepreneurial discovery and value, but what's different, things are always changing. And so what's necessary is to be able to adjust. Entrepreneurs adjust to changing conditions. And so where you have high real estate costs, as we do in New York, one way to do it is through this sort of shared co-working space that others have been discussing. So I think my main theme would be, if you're going to create a condition to enhance the new economy, you don't know where the new ideas are going to come, so you have to be flexible. The local governance has to be able to allow people to make contacts, reuse spaces in ways that nobody ever thought of before. Maybe some people don't like initially, but in the long run could be beneficial to all as a means of tremendous economic development.
Excellent. It's interesting. We have about 10 minutes right now, and there's so much to cover, but I think that I want to talk a little bit about what it means to create an ecosystem that will really enhance and develop and encourage entrepreneurship. And when I look at Phil, you're a kind of ground zero in Detroit for what people are talking about, the new economy and the entrepreneurship, and you've got this maker space, it sounds like, and you've got a restaurant as well. And when I asked you before how many people you had that were like you in Detroit, you'd said 700,000. But how many, there's got to be critical mass in some way that you need to begin in a series of things, and I think we can probably talk about that among ourselves, about if resources were not an issue, and you were thinking about how you would attract, what kinds of people do you need to really turn Detroit into Brooklyn?
I think, if you look at Detroit, we have a lot of amazing things going on for us, don't get me wrong, but the problems that we do face tend to be certain problems on steroids, right? And so where we are seeing successes when community is together. So our neighborhoods that are densely populated, that's when we're seeing growth. When our neighborhoods can connect to other neighborhoods, that's when we're seeing innovation and change. And so it really is about how we can connect. Sometimes there's physical boundaries between us, and we've been able to pass those through technology and communication through that. But
what kind of platforms particularly? Do you have one that has been working about breaking these boundaries?
We really struggle. Cell phones in Detroit are, that's the main means of communication,
Okay.
Because we have less resources than most places.
Got you.
That's the reality.
Role of government?
Government.
Get out of the way?
Yeah, exactly. Get out of the way. I love our government, but they have very little resources. And so I think it's about becoming efficient. What the gentleman talked about, trimming some of the code and rethinking some of those codes and things. Just making the city match what the citizens want, how they live.
Got you. Steph, in terms of Kickstarter as a platform, talk about what you imagine is going to be happening with these civic projects.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said earlier, it's something that we've seen naturally emerge on the site. It is this instinct that people have, I think, when you live somewhere to just try to make it a better place. And there's people, like the Phils of the world who really take it and run with it. And then there are those of us who show up at his space and take advantage of that kind of space. So I think the projects we'll see on Kickstarter will be the full range. It'll be the people with the really big visions, the big ideas, but it'll be people with the tiny interventions.
Stadium, the library's been on, and there's so very local.
Yeah, it will be. One of my favorite civic projects on Kickstarter to date is a woman. She's an artist. There was a bus stop she waited at every single day. It was a big spot where everyone waited at all day long. And she said, "This place is ugly. It's hideous. Let's spruce it up a bit." So they raised $1,000 and they did it together as a community.
I think the interesting thing about Kickstarter, it gets a lot of press for these multi-million-dollar projects, but the average project ranges between $2,000 and $5,000. So it really is widely distributed when you talk about the amount of money that's been pledged and donated. So in this mesh economy where we are all living, can you talk a little bit about what you think is between you and Sandy? I'd love to hear, again, Ground Zero, what do you need to create this ecosystem? What are the key ingredients? You've got excess capacity, both in terms of talent, and then you've got, in the way you look at it, we're all sitting on our apartments, and many people have they have cars that they can share, and they have offices they can share, and they have tools they can share. And
yeah, I mean, so basically we as a global community have too much stuff. You know, there's more cars in the US than there are people. That goes on and on. So the idea would be that we're like, imagine a taxi light, on duty, off duty, on pretty much anything that you value or somebody else would value. And you simply put it in network when you're not using it. You can generate either a trade or cash, but some currency that you consider to be valuable. So that, I think, is moving. People are becoming more open. Cities, as an example, with Airbnb, competing with hotels putatively, as well as ride sharing and car sharing. So ride sharing is having a big little midget mud wrestling with a number of taxis and taxi companies in New York, San Francisco, Paris. So part of this is, I think, the challenge of how do you nurture and embrace a growing nascent economy and startups, entrepreneurship, innovation, and at the same time protect sort of the historical, let's say, incumbents. And I think the history or the tendency has been to use the regulators, like in California right now, the PUC is fighting with the ride-sharing companies.
Well, this is an interesting issue. So if you're going to share your car in your home, it has interesting impact on insurance. Yeah. And the future of insurance and what that looks like, because if you don't own any things anymore, but you just have access, what does that look like? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't know.
There's the old saying is city air makes you free. And that's because, cities like New York, not every city does that, but I mean, cities like New York are the ones you mentioned, are, there's freedom, there's tolerance, there's also the opportunity to get criticism, and there's mobility. The thing about economists, I can criticize, we all criticize economists, but economists tend to treat things as more or less predictable. Entrepreneurship is one of those things that you can't predict. Right, you don't know who's going to be an entrepreneur. You don't know what the next big thing is going to be.
You've got an idea about characteristics of you may not know what's going to be a successful runaway
But the conditions that foster entrepreneurship go back to flexibility and adaptability. You have to be able to, I mean, we were talking about this before in the green room, how regulators tend to be regulating the economy of 50 years ago. And Jane Jacobs criticized the zoning regulations of her day for separating out different uses, when in fact what you want to do is in fact mix them together, even though it's messy and it's dirty and it's smelly. But out of that flowers all kinds of cultural and economic innovations.
Well, one of the things I think that does happen is when money flows around. And one of the issues that you'll see, one of the reasons why Silicon Valley's been such a hotbed of entrepreneurship, when they have a ground zero in terms of great education, but they also have a lot of people in their 20s who've made a significant amount of money, and that they're willing to expand
they also
and to
have
invest.
Coffee houses.
Well, they've got coffee houses. We've got coffee. So the coffee house culture, that's like Stephen Johnson talking
X
about
tells
that.
Y, gee, I know Z who's working on something that you're working on, and that may be the most important thing that they exchange.
Access to money.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I mean, as an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, I would just say that there's a couple things. One, I think that there's a culture of generosity, which I also experience in other parts of the world as well, meaning that, and we heard this in your intro as well, which I really appreciated, that the idea is that we're in this together, that I actually care about whether you guys succeed, and also that scar tissue can be leveraged. There's an asset. So my historical stupidity, which cost me a lot, by the way, I'm willing to, share my failures liberally, because also in the world that I live in, that's a badge of honor. So it's one that you had the failure and you're not in the witness protection program. and two, that you're willing to tell anybody. So either you're really stupid or you're kind of imagining that that has real value.
Which is true.
The other part I would say is related to that, define, refine, and scale, that the future will be prototyped. That our ability to get out there and try stuff and fail fast and cheaply and learn from each other. And I think that that sensation is what we're seeing in pop-ups, and in a way it's like we want to skin the city, that you can do something very rapidly and create a flavor or a sensation, a use for something, and see if people take it. And I think Kickstarter allows for funding. It's really what Phil's doing, and it's a lot, I think, of what Sandy's been talking about, which is kind of teeing up things to see who's
Yeah, and I would even follow up and say, you know, looking at, unfortunately or fortunately, all I do is look at projects on Kickstarter.
Gives you an idea
Sounds
what's
fun,
going on in
though.
the world.
I really do.
Great.
It's incredible. And the 2 points you just raised about generosity and prototyping, I mean, that is the fuel that makes Kickstarter go. It is people being incredibly generous of spirit and ideas, and jumping in on each other's ideas and supporting those ideas. It's this two-way exchange that's happening of people who have, you know, the creators and the backers. This is where the generosity is. And then prototyping, and people are really just throwing it up and saying, hey, what do you guys think? And it is about testing ideas, and those are the people who are most gutsy do go the farthest.
It's one other piece which I get asked all the time about Kickstarter. I don't know if you do. We just met, so is like, because people put up product ideas or anything that they're thinking, and they're very disclosive because they want you to support them.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I get to ask the question, well, why don't people get ripped off?
Right.
Aren't they afraid? And in a way, it's sort of the spirit of it is very open. When I say it, I mean this shift that we're about to really all experience, if you haven't yet. I think the shift to a more open and a more sharing-based economy is very much. The second thing I think is that the community actually is paying attention. Like if somebody ripped off somebody's design and ran with it, I think you would see a herd of.
The community will rise up.
Yeah.
They'll ride them, and they won't support them.
Right,
So
exactly.
they won't go through.
It's more
So
than
there's-
the thing. It's the
So it's self-cleaning.
Well, the community can do a far better job of watching and monitoring than any one single person. You can't scale an organization quickly enough to do that.
Absolutely.
We're out of time, which I hate. And I hate that we don't have a chance to wrap it up, but I'm delighted. Thank you so much, Sandy,
Thank
and
you.
Stephanie, and Phil, and Lisa. Great.